Like I was like, oh, Ramli, you wrote the book on product led onboarding, but I actually don't suggest people start there because you can actually learn a lot from how and where you're losing them. You can see their eyes glazing over and they're like looking back as, whoa, this is a lot.
Welcome to Onboarding Therapy. In this episode, Sherelle and I are joined by an amazing guest, Ramli John. Ramli literally wrote the book on onboarding, so we are excited to dive into the topic of reducing onboarding friction. And the aspect of friction we ended up focused on surprised us all. Let's get into it. This is the first time that we have a guest, not from Arrows, on the show, so we're really excited. We've known Ramli for a long time, many years, and I think Sherelle's known Ramli from the onboarding world even longer than that. So super excited to get your insights. Would love if you want to start with a quick kind of intro in your background.
Yeah, my name is Ramli John. Some people also call me RJ. Founder of DelightPath. I was formerly working at AppQs and wrote the best-selling book Product Led Onboarding. Been working on onboarding for many years now, and really it's my jam. I love talking about it. So thank you for the invite to join your show.
Yeah, of course. Before we jump into kind of the main topic, I would be curious to hear how you got started in onboarding, especially because I feel like it's such a new thing still. So I think it's always interesting when people have been in it for a while.
Yeah, I got into it as a growth consultant. I was working with some SaaS companies. This is like 7, 8 years ago, and I was tasked to bring on signups. And through my curiosity, I wondered if the signups I was bringing in was actually sticking around, and I found out they weren't. And that lit a fire in me. This feels wrong. This feels absolutely wrong that, hey, they're happy that I'm bringing signups, but they're actually not sticking around. I got into the whole searching and finding content around it. That's how I came across Wes Bush. He wrote the best-selling book Product Led Growth, but before that, he was talking a lot about onboarding because he found that's the entry point to product led growth, or the beachhead is like people talking about, oh, how do I improve my experience? Onboarding got through that. So I ended up working together on multiple companies, Mixpanel and a product with Microsoft and different companies. And I ended up codifying our process into product led onboarding. So it's been my onboarding journey.
Awesome. Cool. Let's kick it off. Today, we're going to talk about kind of friction in the onboarding process. I think specifically from the customer or user's perspective and things that they're typically running up against. And then hopefully we can get into kind of ways that teams solve for that too.
Happy to jump in on that one. So frictions are all over the place. And I think there's, in my mind, two severe impacts when there is a lot of friction. The first one is bad internal process. Just generally butting heads, running into challenges internally, running into disagreements internally, which that stuff is solvable. But if that hangs out too long, now it's the customer experience that really suffers. And that's why we hear things like we have a churn problem at day 30 and we have a retention problem at month 6. It's oftentimes that internal friction of understanding what even is onboarding, what should the metrics be, what should we be working towards, that if not resolved turns into some of that friction. And then the impact is unfortunately churn and a bad customer experience.
Yeah. And I think that you really hit the nail there. I've never thought about there's the internal friction to onboarding where it's not the friction in the experience itself, but it's like not aligned. They're not aligned on, hey, what is onboarding, like you mentioned, but what is success for our customers and users? Funny enough, I've talked to quite a few teams recently, the past few weeks, and they're often like, who owns it? First of all, who owns it? Like, who owns it? It's so many different places. But the other thing is, I'm finding one pieces of it's owned by certain functions and they don't talk to each other. Like marketing owns onboarding emails, and then customer success or customer onboarding owns the one-to-one, and then product owns in product, and they don't talk to each other. That's such a big challenge that results in fractured experience. The worst one is when there actually is nobody owning anything, and when that happens, like that is even worse experience. And I think that's often, to your point, Cheryl, like that's a root cause of friction. Bad friction is misalignment, and the team's not working together to create that really smooth, seamless experience rather than, hey, let's actually work together this rather than like you do your thing and I do my thing and we'll figure it out after.
Yeah. One other negative output of that kind of environment too is often what Kim and I were talking about this recently. Often what happens is then those teams, let's start with the onboarding team, they themselves don't really understand their metrics or what they're working towards. So now you're just heads down doing your day job, doing calls, trying to get customers onboarded. And a few months go by or a few years go by and you look up and now it's like this thing has been labeled as a cost center and we don't know what the value is. And now there's even less desire to collaborate internally because we haven't proven value. We haven't proven what we're working on or what we're working towards. So now you're also burning out team members potentially and causing more of that internal friction because there is no collaboration. And then again, all this just keeps trickling back to a worse and worse customer experience because customers don't care, nor should they care what you are doing behind the scenes. It's not their problem to figure out you have bad handoffs or you have CRM fields that are missing properties. I don't care about that when I'm talking to my vendors. I just want to know what to do and how to go do it and when I need to do it by. And if you can't convey that to me, that's the first point of friction externally. And then again, if internally you don't know how to solve for that, if I came to you and said, hey, what's next? And you're like, I don't know, my checklist says to talk to you about these two things and that's my job, because you're not getting guidance or you're not getting support or you're not getting alignment on the bigger business metrics, it can spiral pretty quickly into a bad recipe.
That's a really good point. Like the misalignment in metrics, misalignment in success. And even in that checklist, misalignment in steps. Like this is something that what should be in the minimum steps that your customer should do. I find that often what's shown, this is something that happened at AppQs as well, where marketing owned this, product owned that. And I got a chance to get those different teams together and, hey, what does our ideal journey look like? And if that's the case, what are the ideal steps? So that when you have a checklist, what's shown on the screen in the end product and what's written in the email and what customer onboarding team is saying one-on-one, it all aligns. And that's so much better when like the whole boat is rowing in the same direction, or the ideal success state for your new customer, the ideal metrics you're actually working towards to the same metric. And also you're all aligned on what is the steps our customers need to do to get there. Because if you don't have that alignment, then you might be like rowing all in different directions and end up in different places.
I feel like a big thing too is that I think it's really interesting. I didn't expect it to take this turn about it, the friction actually being all internal, but I think it's so true. And I think a big piece of it too is even if you do have alignment, I think a lot of teams design their process based on what their internal teams need to have done. So they're creating steps in their processing. Like, we need the customer to activate on these 3 things or whatever it is, because that's what we've determined to be success. But that's not what the customer is determining to be success. That's not what the customer values. And so I think that's a huge issue too, is people have a well-designed, well-thought-out plan that maybe has some kind of internal alignment. But if you're not thinking of what is actually valuable to the customer, what is actually going to have our customer not just activate on the product, but actually see success and be better at their jobs because they're activating on our product. I think that's what's missing from even the teams with the best communication and collaboration.
I could give you a hug right now. I've been preaching this for a while with new customers. Obviously at Arrows, we get to talk to customers working on their onboarding plans and onboarding products and onboarding processes. So I get to selfishly see a lot of that. And I've been jokingly, but not really jokingly, calling people out on what I call selfish tasks, which is exactly what you just described. And we all have them. I have a bunch of selfish tasks. I want people to send Arrow's onboarding plans out. That's my main goal, right? But when and where you present those selfish tasks can also then be a gap in the process or where people get hung up. And to Kim's point, if, and most commonly, those selfish tasks don't tend to align to the customer's goals or customer's pains, that's another point of friction now. And so all of these little things can really compound quickly. And now customers are stuck. That's what the end result looks like. They're stuck in the process. If you don't have that internal alignment or internal collaboration, it's often hard to get them unstuck in that process. And then if you're not involved in some way or fashion, you also don't really know how to optimize that going forward. So now you have created this expensive function inside of your business that is not actually driving revenue or even retaining revenue for that matter. And of course, it's going to be labeled a cost center and you're not going to get resources and support. But it's that, if you remember, Ramli, when I was back at Sprout Social and you were at PLG, we talked about onboarding guilds, and that's what we had set up at Sprout.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
where its sole purpose was to build collaboration internally. And it didn't start on day one. We had a one-to-one on. We then developed it a little bit more into strategic webinars that could reach more folks. Then we were like, oh, there's something here. Let's build upon this in the product and get activation. But one thing you also said earlier is incredibly important, is that all those pathways have to lead to the same end result. And they're not all going to get there in the same way. There's no world where a quick in-app tour is going to replicate 5 one-to-one human phone calls. That's not the intent. But the end state should reflect a similar thing that takes that customer from start point to that first value realization moment to the second one and beyond. And if you can align all those pathways, then you have a shot at, and if you remember, we used to talk about like 100% onboarding. That's a vanity metric. There's no such thing. There is no world where every one of your customers is going to be onboarded the same way.
Yeah.
We're talking about adults. We're talking about human learning. We're talking about psychology. Everyone operates a little bit differently. So if your goal is to onboard 100% of your customers, I'll be the first to tell you it's not going to happen. But if you can provide pathways and options for 100% of your customers to have a chance at being onboarded, and lean into where people learn differently. And some folks will want to do one call and then do a few self-guided recorded webinars and maybe jump into the product and click around and see a few modules pop up that guide them. Those pathways all leading customers to that general end state is how you build a holistic onboarding program that does get buy-in and drive results.
Yeah, it's really about that. I want to double click on what you said there. That is about that really catering to how people learn. Like people learn in different ways. I like to ask this question to folks where IKEA is this big store where it's a furniture store, but like it's a maze. You can get lost in there. Yeah. And I like to ask people like, hey, do you shop by following the pathway? There's a certain route that's arrows on the ground, or do you shop, or I do, you know what you want. I need a desk. I go there directly. I get out like within 5 minutes, like, which is almost, they try to make it impossible. Or do you just jump around? And people have different answers to that when I ask them that question. And it's, imagine if IKEA like forced you that you must follow this path or else you cannot shop at IKEA. People would be upset. And I think it's the same way here, where you're giving people the option based on how they prefer to learn. And if they want to learn through one-on-one, give them that option. And if they want to learn through a webinar or through a workshop with your team, give them that option. And if they want to learn through just getting in there and just getting going, give them that option and making it easy. And that's really the whole, we're talking about friction, but like the friction of just giving them just this one path of learning, this pathway, like you mentioned, often limits how many people you can onboard, because there is value in one-to-one and one-to-many, and also in product. If they all work together, that's great. And giving the people the different options based on their learning style is like super, super powerful. That most advanced B2B companies, like what you guys were doing, onboarding Guild at Sprout Social and learning pathways, that's what like the best in class product-led companies are doing. Like Slack and HubSpot, they're giving people the option on how they want to learn rather than one way.
Yeah. And in your analogy that you just used there, I love that IKEA analogy. The most important piece you said was, my goal was to get a desk. So if your goal is only to go in there and get a desk, I don't need the 1,500 yellow arrows on the ground taking me all over the store. But if my goal is in there, and I've done this as a team event actually in the past, to do a scavenger hunt at IKEA, then cool. Let's go zip through all the aisles and go through all the arrows and explore the whole thing. But the point is, both options are there. And IKEA somewhat does this too. You can weave your way through certain aisles and end up in other areas or other departments, but it's about those options to that end state. The most important is the goal, right? What is the customer actually trying to get to? That's how you can avoid some of those selfish tasks. And don't get me wrong, I have plenty of selfish tasks in every process I have. We all have needs. We all have our own goals. We all have metrics. That shouldn't be the first thing you put in front of a customer. Give them some value first. Let them solve one of their problems first. Let them feel like, this pain's going to be a tiny bit easier if I do this. That momentum builds. Then sure, let's sprinkle on some of our own selfish tasks and upgrades and all that, because I also do think that's important. That's how you turn onboarding into a revenue generating center as well, by presenting opportunities, by helping customers see the value of cells and upgrades and premium features you have. That's all great. We should be focused on that. They just shouldn't be the things we lead with if they're not helping customers with their problems and goals.
So I'm imagining most people that are watching are in some way involved in onboarding that probably has a lot of friction. Even Ramli, you were saying Sherelle was running best in class onboarding program previously, but there's still friction. Your customers are still feeling friction and your internal teams are still feeling friction, even in a super, super well designed, really well thought out, lots of resources kind of program. What are the steps that you would recommend taking to start evaluating where are those friction points? You're not going to solve every single friction point, but where are the places that you would start or recommend a team starting to look and try to figure out how they can reduce some of that friction?
I think a best place to start is just, first of all, I think hearing, this is the reason why I love, like, if I had to do a startup from scratch, I would actually onboard them one-on-one, because you can hear the pain. Like, I was like, oh, Ramli, you wrote the book on product led onboarding, but I actually don't suggest people start there, because you can actually learn a lot from how and where you're losing them. You can see their eyes glazing over and they're like looking back as, whoa, this is a lot. Like, that's great qualitative feedback that's saying that, hey, this point here is overwhelming and confusing, and they're getting lost, and they're not understanding to Cheryl's point earlier, they're not understanding the value and the why and what's in it for me in that point. And if it needs to be said one-on-one, then that's an interesting place to start. As it scales, like, definitely there's some tools, like more internal tools specifically for self-serve, full story, that you can watch people. They call it rage clicking, like they're clicking the thing over and over again. They have some analysis around that, and you can also take a look at like drop-off points in the journey when you have data, like all the steps are laid out and a lot of your users are not doing this, or a lot of your customers are not doing specifically a certain step of it. Then that's an interesting place where, why are they not doing that? Is there a struggle or is there a pain that they're not understanding in that specific area there?
Yeah, and to add to that, I love all that, especially the bit about not starting with product led. And I'm not saying don't start with product led. I'm saying it's easier to do product led if you have a little bit
Agreed.
of intel from one-to-one onboarding. And that doesn't also mean you have to have a dedicated team where you're spending money hiring a bunch of people. That could be the founder talking to customers and just jotting down bits and building off of that. But a couple things to add. I think, one, approach it, especially at first, as a one-size-fits-most model, no matter what pathway you're going down, because you're never going to solve for everyone's needs and everyone's pains in any one pathway at any one time. Inevitably, people will get stuck. And I think that's where data becomes really important, and collaboration again. So knowing where customers are stuck is the first key to unlocking them and helping them and growing them. So at Arrows, Kim and I always talk about onboarding never ends and always be optimizing your onboarding programs. And fundamentally, we mean those things, but we also don't mean sit and spend months at a time trying to craft this perfect template or perfect process, because you're guaranteed to waste time and money doing that. And then you're still not going to actually make progress or learn what is or isn't working. And instead, start using plans, spreadsheets, emails, whatever it is you're putting out into the world, and learn from that. If 95% of your customers get stuck on the same task, that is a bad task. Let's figure out what is going on in that task. And oftentimes that actually is tied back to some of that selfishness. We tend to jam a lot of selfish things inside of these tasks, and then they become really big and really complex and really hard to achieve. And now you have two problems. Customers are stuck in that almost certainly, and you don't know what part you're stuck on. So now you're doing the generic, hey, Ramli, it's been 3 weeks, man, haven't heard from you. What are you up to over there? Whereas if I knew exactly where you were stuck, I could reach out and say, hey, are you having trouble scheduling time with me because you're in a different time zone? Here's a different calendar. Let's keep this process moving. So the more of those moments of, and this is where I think it is external friction, where customers get stuck, that is tied to you solving for that, having honest conversations internally of, is this a sales problem or sales expectations misset? Is this a product problem? Is the design not as intuitive as we thought it was? Is this an onboarding and a success problem because we're not delivering the right value or the right training at the right time in that process? And enough of those moments, and that is where that internal collaboration becomes important, actually helps solve for that. Because then you can proactively address, if the customers are getting stuck on the same misset expectation every time, it's a sales challenge. Let's figure out what's happening there, what's being communicated. If those sales reps are saying the right things, it's a marketing challenge. What are we marketing on our websites and on our marketing pages that are leading customers to think that when they show up to their onboarding process or call or whatever it is, they're thinking, this is very different than what I was just marketed to or sold on. And then the other kind of big challenge I see often is, and we're all somewhat guilty of this, especially in SaaS, is that we highlight that this thing is going to be easy to set up and fast to get going on and quick to deploy, and it's going to change your life and revolutionize your business. Then you get to onboarding and it's a 3-month process and 150 tasks and 20 calls set up for you and all sorts of back and forth. So that is, again, internal misalignment. So it is better to start with something, to Kim's main question. Start on a process, figure out where customers are getting stuck, unpack that, and then keep going and keep going. And enough of that then lets you confidently sit and say, hey, design team, we need this. Hey, CS leader, we need you to stop saying this in onboarding because it's not true. Hey, sales, stop talking about this feature this way because it actually is causing friction in the process. And enough of that really does keep customers moving forward.
I love that flow chart. I was like, I'm already imagining. It's like, if this is the problem, then this is sales led. If this is the problem, then it's marketing. I can totally see that as a piece of content that is like flowy chart that can be shared.
And point internally too. Don't just sit and blame your sales colleagues. And it's easy to say the sales, trust me, I know it is very easy to say it was the sales rep's problem, or it was a marketing problem, or that's a product problem. But there's a lot of internal reflection that I think onboarding teams and onboarding leaders don't do. And it's easy to just point fingers everywhere else. And I think that is as important as the rest of that collaboration and feedback.
I was just going to add on the onboarding never ends piece. Actually, Sherelle, I haven't told you this yet, but I had a call with one of our customers, and they were telling me about getting ready and sending their first Arrows plan. So they sent one Arrows plan. They had a call with you, Sherelle, and you advised them. You were like, where is that customer stuck? Move that task to a different place in your process. And then he just sent out his second plan. He had made that change, and it was like magic. Like just that one small change, our next customer went through so quickly. And I think that's like exactly what we talk about all the time. It's like you set up a process, test the process. Like you're not going to have a perfect onboarding process ever, but especially not initially. So don't spend way too much time over optimizing for the perfect process. Get something out and then analyze and see, everyone's getting stuck here. This is a problem in our process. And that is maybe something that you can solve on the onboarding side by breaking it up into different steps. Or it's something, like you said, where marketing or product or someone has to get involved. But start small and look at a granular level. Where are people getting stuck? And then just optimize that over time. But don't wait for a big overhaul in your process to make it perfect. Or also don't not optimize your process because you're worried about a huge rollout that's going to make a game-changing difference. It's small changes over time is what really adds up to a better onboarding experience.
Yeah, totally. And a little bit more of a advanced or future kind of approach to that too is you will inevitably have hard and complex tasks. It is also, I think, important to acknowledge that they are going to be hard and complex and not try to oversimplify them at certain times. And I think knowing that is also helpful because inevitably when people do stall there a little bit, at least you are aware or expect that to be the case. And so if there's nothing else you can do there, that's okay. There's other things you can optimize within that, or there's other ways to approach other parts of that to keep things streamlined. But I think it's important to know where those kind of milestones are that help customers realize value. And it's also important to know where those points of friction are. And I think if you are proactive with those points of friction, customers also appreciate that. One common question I get all the time when I'm doing any sort of onboarding calls at Arrows or any sort of consulting around that is there such a thing as too many tasks in my onboarding process? And my genuine answer is no, if they are the tasks that help me realize what I just paid for or the thing that I came to you for. And that's back to that selfish task kind of concept. Now, if you have 10 tasks that help me unlock the value of your product and 70 tasks to get me to upgrade and do other things and try features and try beta stuff, yeah, that's bad. That is not a good long process. But if you have 100 tasks and I need to accomplish all of those 100 tasks because I'm setting up a complex CRM or some big data integration that needs to happen behind the scenes, then admit that and acknowledge that and lead with that. And I think customers also appreciate that because they now know this is going to be longer than I expected. And it's not actually a friction point in my onboarding anymore. It is the onboarding process. This is what I've been led to expect. This is what's still going to get me there. So a lot of that transparency, I think, is also helpful, both in marketing, sales, but especially in onboarding itself too.
And what I really love about that is just being upfront. Like it'll take 100 steps, but like I think in terms of friction that people don't talk enough about, and they push the wrong lever to do it, is around motivation. Like if you're gonna say if it's 100 steps, but it's gonna make your life so much easier, and you're gonna be doing less work in the long term, it's gonna save you this much time, then I'm like, heck yeah, let me get through that 100 tasks as quickly as possible, because it's going to help me, what you mentioned earlier, what it's going to help me do what I need to do better, rather than often when people think about motivation, they're like, oh, let's just give them an extra days in terms of trial, give them a t-shirt or swag. No, it's if you could describe like an internal motivation that you can really push them, they don't see friction, they see the outcome is much better than what they're going through. It's like they can, a lot of ads around working out and getting fit. You see that working out sucks, dieting sucks, right? But if you go through it, like here's the outcome. And that's, I think, like one thing that people talk about friction is, yeah, some friction is necessary. Then you got to motivate them in a good, positive way by describing the outcome.
Yeah. And again, like towards, like you said earlier, towards their own goals, right? As someone working out, your goals might be to look better. Your goals might be to get healthier. Your goals might be to gain muscle mass. Your goals might be to lose weight. There are different goals in there. So again, just bucketing into you're going to be XYZ probably isn't it either.
That's true.
And that's where discovery questions are important. That's where good sales to success handoffs are important, because oftentimes that information is somewhat gathered in marketing forums, and it's asked again on sales calls, and it's asked again on discovery calls in onboarding. Then the CS agent 6 months down the road is asking again, what are your goals? And one kind of tip I have on that is, instead of asking, confirm. So look back at notes, look back at historical context, look back at calls you've recorded and say, hey, Ramli, your goal used to be to increase your onboarding speed by 25%. Is that still true? So even if I don't actually know that's true or not, that opens the conversation for you to say, actually, no, Sherelle, now it's to get it to 20%. Let's talk about how we get there. And then when I come to you and say, here are 100 tasks, but the result is going to be a 5% improvement in your onboarding speed, there's your motivator, right? You're going to care less about the tasks and more about the end result and that motivation that you are after.
It's interesting that we really dug into the internal friction, like right from the get-go. We spent a lot of time with that. I have this framework and it nicely fits into it. Like how when we think about friction and onboarding, there's 3 levels. Like the deepest one, I know at the very base is around product friction. Like we talked about steps that they have to do, that they really need to. The second step above that is around social friction. Friction that is, I originally thought of it as external, but I'm writing down notes. When I say external, like how do you get them to buy in as a team, selling it up if it's necessary, or getting the whole org, the customer org around your product, and using a lot of products is a multiplayer mode. But now that we talk about it, it's like there's also a internal social friction, getting the whole company aligned on onboarding success and things like that. And the third thing we didn't talk as much about is emotional friction, which is often customers being afraid or fearful of change and things like that. But I'm really glad that we really dug into that. And it's something for people who are listening in who want to improve their onboarding. Start with your team. Start like internally. Like are you aligned on those success metrics? Are you aligned on the steps? Do you all agree where the friction step is? Does product know that? Does customer onboarding, customer success, customer experience know that? Does marketing, sales know that? And then you go from there. I think that's a very good starting point in terms of tackling any kind of friction.
Agree with everything Ramli said and really double down on that like internal collaboration piece, because that is how you start to unlock a lot of this. And if that is done more efficiently, then I do believe the results on the customer journey at least initially improve. And then inevitably there's going to be friction there. There's going to be the change management process that Ramli's alluding to of rolling stuff out and change. There's friction points all over the place. I think the tips would be, or the main tips to your question, Kim, is start small, find one or two things that you can work on, fix those, see the results. And it's that and that's how you end up building an onboarding guild, or this internal monthly meeting where you get to sit and talk to all the leaders of every department and preach about what is and isn't working. It's showing also, just like you have to show customers value, you have to show your internal teams value too, as to why they would change or lean in or add resources, right? This helps sales move deals faster. This helps marketing close leads more quickly. This helps support have less issues after the fact if we do this. It's bits like that can really help build the program over time. And then the best tip I can give is don't expect it to happen overnight. We just talked about guilds and programs and stuff like that. We are talking about years of development to get those things to the places they are, but start somewhere, get going, and aim for progress, not perfection.
This is great. Thanks, Ramli. We would love to have you on again at some point to talk about the emotional and social friction, because those are obviously big points too. But yeah, I think it's interesting that it went the direction of internal, but I do agree that's like the thing that you need to figure out and solve for first, because if you don't have that, you just can't build out the other kind of layers of the program. So it makes a lot of sense.